Hey everyone, today I'm going to continue on with my discussions of the films of 1973, which is going to be a year-long series where I look back at films from 50 years ago. For me personally, how they looked like to me in audiences in 73 and how they might look to me today and how different they might look. And I did The Sting, was my first video of this little mini section of 4 films to kick off this year-long series. So I did this thing, and next up is going to be The Day of the Jackal. This is directed by Fred Zinnemann from a best-selling novel by Frederick Forsyth. And this was the era where Hollywood struck gold with best-selling books, novels. Last year, the previous year, in 1972, we had Deliverance and The Godfather, as well as Day of the Jackal. In 73, there was Papillon and The Exorcist, and soon to come would be Jaws. And these were all novels that were, it seemed like everybody read them. You know, it was just, you were constantly, oh, you got to read this, you got to read that. The page turners, and Hollywood was able to, in this era at least, successfully adopt into popular films. Now, Frederick Forsyth, this is his debut novel, and the long career is still with us, of writing thrillers. He was originally a journalist for Reuters. He was stationed in Paris during assassination attempts on Charles de Gaulle, who was the president at the time. And these assassinations were organized by a group with the acronym OAS, and these were disgruntled former officers in the French armed forces who were angry at de Gaulle for allowing Algeria, their main colony of the French Empire, to pursue its independence. So this was de Gaulle, according to these people, was a traitor to the nation. They were ultra-nationalist, and but they weren't terrorists. They said, well, we're patriots. We're not terrorists. I've heard that before. So the OAS, the film opens with a real-life reenactment of one of the assassination attempts that were unsuccessful. And it was amazing that de Gaulle and his wife eluded harm, because they had submachine guns firing into his car, a score of bullets, but they came out of it unharmed. Now this OAS organization, they were infiltrated by the French security forces. So the top level, only at the top level, they decided that they would pursue the assassination, not by themselves, but they would hire a professional assassin to get the job done on de Gaulle. So the film has a giant spoiler, especially in 1973, because de Gaulle was a very famous person from World War II and being president of France, I think, a couple times. So for many years he was in the news, and he had died a couple of years before, and pretty much everybody knew he died of natural causes. So how could when they were the studio was sort of perplexed. How do we make a film when the audience knows the ending? There's this big spoiler. But of course, it's how it's told. And this is, why do people rewatch films? You know, that everything, they know it's going to happen. They know every scene and how it's going to happen. Yet they watch them over and over and over again, because it's really how the movie is told. It's what's memorable about a film. Once you get the plot out of the way and the twists and turns, you can really look at the film for what it is. So what develops in this film is dual storylines. We watch the assassin and his methods, and it's very compelling. There's sort of a fascination with his ruthlessness. And then there's a police procedural. So we cross-cut between that procedural and the assassin. The police procedural, they learn through their informants that there is a assassin that has been hired, but they have no idea who this man might be. Absolutely no idea. So they basically start from scratch with this police procedural, but there is a real sense of urgency. So this police procedural, the investigation is headed by a sort of lower level police detective and assistant, but he's thought to be, the most efficient, and if anybody can get the job done, he'll get it done. Now he is not. So when he appears in front of the ministry, he is not part of the French aristocracy, and they let him know that, and then, interestingly enough, the assassin has an aristocratic bearing about him. He's English, and he seems to come from the English aristocracy. So Michael Lonsdale plays the detective. He played very well, very quiet, kind of realistic portrayal of dedication. Edward Fox plays the jackal. Edward Fox sort of specialized in aristocratic roles throughout his career, but I think he's probably most famous for his role here as the jackal. And he is the brother of James Fox, who was in The Servant, a Joseph Losey film, and coincidentally enough, Edward Fox was discovered by director Fred Zinnemann in another Joseph Losey film where he had a small part in The Go-Between. And so part of the fascination of the film is the methods being employed in the procedural and being employed by the assassin, the storylines. How are they going to converge? We wonder what's it all going to lead to, even though there's a big spoiler as far as de Gaulle is, died of natural causes. As in many French Fred Zinnemann films, there's terrific performances along the way, and I'll just mention a couple here. Cyril Cusack, he gives such a memorable it's almost like a miniature performance, his soft-spoken, wry, amoral attitude to building this gun to the specifications that the Jackal needs. We get a brief glimpse of Derek Jacobi in one of his earliest, I think, film performances. And then Delphine Seyrig, she plays a baroness who comes into contact with the jackal, and his aristocratic bearing comes into play here. It's sort of a throwaway role. You've seen it many times, but Seyrig's beauty, intelligence, or elegance really comes into play. And there's a number of other terrific performances throughout. I think one of the impediments to the film is the accents. Now, Fred Zinnemann had wanted the French to speak French, and obviously the English to speak English. But this is 1973. The studio nixed that. The studio says, no way, people can't read subtitles, especially Americans. And there's no way. So instead of having, so the French speak English with a French accent, and the English speak, obviously English with an English accent, but some English actors are playing in the French roles, including the Minister of Security, played by Alan Bedell, who speaks English, with an English accent. So there's a little bit of the impact of the documentary approach. It takes a little bit of a hit with these accents, but you get used to it as the film goes on. So again, there's this sort of documentary approach. There's lots of great location shooting in this film, exterior-wise and even interior-wise. Fred Zinnemann had worked as an intern sort of for Robert Flaherty in the early 1930s on his documentaries. And he was also involved in a very famous film, German film, made in Berlin around 1930 called People on Sunday. And this was sort of a community kind of filmmaking, which not only included Fred Zinnemann, but also Billy Wilder, Robert Siodmak, many others. I think Edward G. Ulmer might have been part of that, that would eventually come to Hollywood and be Hollywood, fairly significant, very significant Hollywood directors. So we have this documentary approach. We get the exteriors in Paris and London all look fantastic. We were in the Alps for a little bit. We were in Rome. Even some of the interiors, the producer was able to film in the French ministry meeting room. So just beautiful stuff. And then in London, we get a great view of the British Museum Library, the interior of it. It's just fantastic. Anybody out there who's library lovers like me, you know, your eyes bug out when you see something like that. And the movie has a great bit of tension. So there's sort of a timetable, and we see a lot of clocks. And when I heard the interview in the supplements where he said somebody actually counted, there was 31 scenes that had a clock in Day of the Jackal. And of course, Fred Zinnemann's most famous film is High Noon, where we constantly are in this race against time, and lots of clocks in High Noon as well. But it can seem like it's a little wound up pretty tight. But I was never bored. I mean, this was really classic Hollywood filmmaking, realistic kind of film. I thought it would make a really good double bill with Alfred Hitchcock's Topaz, his political thriller that he made a few years earlier. Now, many of the great Hollywood directors of the 30s, 40s, 50s, they were a little bit lost when all the freedom, the newfound freedoms of the late 60s and 70s, and the production code, the studio itself sort of beginning to dismantle a studio system that they very much relied upon. And so, you know, directors like Billy Wilder and Alfred Hitchcock and Howard Hawks and John Ford, William Wyler, they didn't seem to mesh that well with the this new culture. Zinnemann in Day of the Jackal, of course, he's relying on really classical Hollywood thriller kind of editing. But when you relate that to Topaz, Topaz had, as in all Hitchcock films, he would have some very vivid, colorful, sometimes humorous scenes that were, as opposed to being realist, he was a romantic, but he couldn't tie it all together. He didn't have a script, and famously, he actually, in his cameo in Topaz, he throws the script on a park bench in sort of disgust. But Zinnemann had a terrific script here. And the script is very close, is what I remember from the novel, but it also in some of the reading, some of the research I did, it does stick very close to Frederick Forsyth's novel. And Zinnemann is kind of a forgotten director. Now he is famous still. Well, his movie High Noon is famous. I don't know that that movie is famous as far as the director goes, but Zinnemann won 2 Academy Awards for Best Director. He also was nominated 5 other times. So many of his films had in which he was nominated, had other awards, acting awards and technical awards, and Frank Sinatra famously won Best Supporting Actor in From Here to Eternity, which Zinnemann directed. And 2 of his films that I really liked when I was growing up as a kid, because they were on TV a lot, was A Nun Story with Audrey Hepburn. Well, I still think it's one of her best films. I haven't her best performances. I haven't seen that film in a long time. And the other is The Sundowners, which is about a sheep shearer in Australia, sort of itinerant sheep shearer in Australia. And starring, of all people, Robert Mitchum, Deborah Kerr playing his wife. Neither of those are on Blu-ray. I haven't seen them in many years. And most of Zinnemann's films are not on Blu-ray, you know, despite the fact that they were so honored in their time. So, again, Dave, JACKAL, 2 hours and 20 minutes. I was never bored with this movie at all. I really enjoyed it. I've seen it several times through the years. This is an Arrow video. It has a really good interview, about a 35-minute interview with Neil Sinyard, who wrote a book on Fred Zinnemann and his films. And if the book is as good as this interview, which is excellent, it's a book I really like to read sometime. Next up will be, in this section of 1973 movies, will be Badlands. This is Terry Malick's debut film. Okay, thanks a lot for everybody who managed to listen. I do appreciate it. Comments are welcome. Take care.